One of the principles that you've used, I think you were developing it, is the closest natural equivalency translation philosophy principle. Could you explain that principle a bit?
We've talked about that formal equivalency business. If you just take one word and try to put that into a word of another language and disregard their grammar, disregard their syntax, disregard their word order, disregard their idioms also. We'll get to that probably a little bit later. But so that's formal equivalency. Even our oldest translations in English knew they could not do that. So that, for instance, the King James Version done some 400 years ago, it would have taken that first part of John 3:16 and said, God so loved the world. They realized that even though God came after the verb in the Greek language, they had to bring that up in the front. And so there was already some adjustment made in form equivalency. Out of that, however, in more recent years, in the last half century or so, there came the dynamic equivalency, a way of looking at translation. And that said, there's got to be equivalency. There's got to be equality in the meaning or the value of what's in the source language and what's in the language that we're translating into. Now let me just give you an example, how different forms can give us the same value. I can take out of my pocket a $5 bill and put that here. And that, in a sense, is the same value as 5 $1 bills. It's the same value as 20 quarters. They have different form, but they have the same value. They have the same meaning when you go into a store. And that's exactly what dynamic equivalency said. We need to find the natural form that that other language uses. So if the word was water in English, they looked for yanyi in Yala. They looked for mung in Efik. They looked for what word speaks about that. In addition, they thought the word order may have to be shifted also in order for things to be clearly understood in another language. And so you might say, as it does say in, I think it's in Deuteronomy and also in Psalms at some place, the mighty arm and the outstretched hand. Now dynamic equivalency would look at that and they'd say, mighty arm and outstretched hand, what does that mean in the original language? And they would see a parallelism between the mighty hand and the outstretched arm, as though the outstretched arm was powerful. Then they looked at English and they say, but outstretched arm in English may mean, hey, I am welcoming you. It could even mean, I surrender. And so there's ambiguity. Dynamic equivalency would say something's got to be done about that. So they came up with the mighty and powerful. So that was, in fact, dynamic equivalence. I want to go on for a minute to say what the closest natural dynamic equivalence is. You notice in that statement, hand is kind of a picture. Powerful hand, you think of something like this. And if you then want outstretched hand to be a parallel to that, you're going to say powerful, outstretched arm. Now there's a picture that comes into your mind with a hand. And if you say mighty and powerful, that's abstract. That's fine. But it's more powerful if you can say a powerful hand and a mighty arm. That's the closest natural equivalency, you see. You could have chosen either one of the two. But we're saying, choose the one that's closest to the source language. If the source language had a picture, if it had an idiom, find a picture, find an idiom. Cross the translation river twice. Say powerful, but have hand there too. Say mighty, but have arm there as well. So equivalence got to do with faithfulness. It's got to do with accuracy. It's got to do with the veracity of the meaning. It's got to do with the same meaning needing to come across. But natural, see, that's a very important word as well, because what may be natural in one language is not always natural in another language. And so we need to find the way that people would talk to each other in their own language. We need to translate into that kind of things. In other words, if we say, You know, he's kind of like a snake in the grass. That's an idiom. Now, can we translate that across to another language where a snake is considered to be a very important animal in that culture? No, we're going to have to find some other way of talking about it. Maybe we're going to use a different kind of idiom, that he is like a skunk, which we also use in English, and that has some kind of idiomatic meaning. Sometimes there's no idiom, and when there's no idiom, you just got to figure out what is the basic denotative meaning and to say it as clearly as you can. And so sometimes you might have to say mighty and strong rather than mighty arm and strong hand.